on to our next very eminent set of speakers. And the topic of discussion is planning for the future, rebuilding relationship with nature. Can we have the introductory slide for our speakers? Conducting this session is the moderator, Dr. Hariharan Chandrasekhar, mentored Alltech Foundation and eQual India. Mr. Hariharan Chandrasekhar is an Indian economist who turned into an entrepreneur and he opened his own company called BCIL. He has presided over projects on water, energy, and green buildings for over 30 years. He is an environmental economist, green business mentor, and policy advocate and urban analyst. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Hariharan with us today because he has been mainstreaming sustainability with a powerful demonstration of economic possibility in accelerating sustainability. Now, let me introduce our panel speakers in an alphabetical order. First of all, we have with us Mr. Alok Agarwal, Chief Marketing Officer, Orient Bell Limited. Alok is a marketing veteran who has built brands across India and abroad, an IIT Mumbai and IIM Bengaluru alumnus with 2 decades of experience. He has built brands across the globe, led new product development, evangelized digital marketing, and created shopper marketing solution for retail outlets. So he is the one who's going to give us the product company's perspective in this session where we are talking about building relationship with nature. Our next eminent speaker is Mr. Mahesh Punjabi, Chief Executive Officer, Mahesh Punjabi Associates. Now, Mahesh Punjabi is a leading interior designer, and in fact, he started his first assignment as an intern at at Tina Anil Ambani's house. I'm sure Tina Ambani doesn't need any introduction for the Indian viewers at least. This was followed by a string of several dynamic residences and uber cool projects he finished for the rich and famous. His design firm is now also operating in Dubai, and Mahesh has expertise in dishing out ultra luxury projects and amenities. So he will be bringing us the opinion and his views on how ultra luxury clients look at discussions, the sustainability. Our next eminent speaker, Rajendra Kumar, founder and principal architect, architect Rajendra Kumar. Architect Rajendra Kumar has 15 years of experience having environmental and urban sensitivity approach and work experiences from Europe. He has mixed experiences of varied scale projects. He is the director for School of Architecture, Noida International University, and has lectured in conferences across India and Spain. And he has worked in Spain and Italy, and he brings to us not only the international and the Indian work exposure, but also how, as an academician, he is looking at this subject. Our next speaker is joining us from Hong Kong, architect Vicky Chan, founder of Avoid Obvious Architects. Vicky Chan founded Avoid Obvious Architects in 2012 with offices in New York and Hong Kong. The firm has been pushing sustainable buildings and cities with focus on combining art with green technology. Vicky's projects include master planning for World Trade Center in New York, Desworks Road Central pedestrianization in Hong Kong, and various smart cities designs in Canada, China, and India. And another very important aspect about Vivek is that he has taught over 6,000 children about sustainable design and architecture, and he believes that our future will be brighter if children are more equipped with creative and sustainable thinking, and rightly so. Our next eminent panel speaker, Mr. Yatin Pandya, founder Footprints Earth. Yatin Pandya is an author, activist, academician, researcher, as well as the practicing architect with this firm Footprints Earth. He is the graduate of CEPT University, Ahmedabad, and has availed Masters of Architectural degree from McGill University, Montreal. And in fact, Yatin has been involved with city planning, urban design, mass housing, architecture, interior design, product designing, conservation projects, you name it, and architect Pandya has done. And in fact, environmental sustainability, socio-cultural appropriateness, timeless aesthetics, and economic affordability are key principles of his projects. So we have our eminent speakers joining here today. Dr. Hariharan, can you hear us? Are you there?
I can. I seem to have a challenge on the video, so I will work on my voice. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So thanks, Alok, joining us here. Mr. Mahesh Panjabi for being here. Vicky, a very warm welcome to you for being here with us today. And I believe architect Yatin Pandya and architect Rajendra Kumar is just joining us in a few minutes. Dr. Hariharan, please go ahead.
Thank you, and good evening to all of you. What a wonderful panel that we have got here, and what a wonderful theme in any case, as I said in my mail too. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all of you who are participants out here. I will take no more than about 4 minutes. We have got 14 speakers and we have got 60 minutes. So we have to see how we can get the best out of each of our speakers. Well, I put it like this to you all. We know the challenges of water scarcity, energy deficits, species extinction, and a host of other things that continue to worsen anyway. Well, yes, some good is coming out of organizations, some of them like the IGBC, LEED, or Griha, and a few of them at the minority who are working on green products and projects and so on. But there are limits to how much you can achieve in business by slowing the velocity at which we are approaching a crisis of such large dimensions that even a COVID will be seen to be a mere flea bite. The Tapovan disaster last week has already shown over 25,000 crore of loss, 7,000 crore down the river, Alaknanda, of just one power project of the NTPC. Coffee and cocoa production lost in South America 3-4 months ago was in billions of dollars. The things today business is doing is not helping change course. We are tinkering around the edges of the market with new products and services. How can we all as business leaders transform things? That is the focus of the next phase of business sustainability to me, to my mind, into the future. And we can see signs that it is emerging. In a sense, therefore, all of the initiatives of particularly the last, say, 10, 12 years has been what we might prize integration and has been founded on a model of business that has somewhat integrated sustainability into pre-existing business considerations. For example, a 5-star hotel that is green rated or a company that sells
we lost him.
Sapna, I think you'll have to call Mr. Hariharan. Lost.
I think there's some network issue at his end. Vicky, we have one question which I'll take here while Dr. Hariharan joins us back. One of our audience has asked that, you have been working, teaching children about architecture and sustainability. What has taught that to you as a designer in return? What have been the learnings from the children as a designer?
Oh, it has been quite interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
To begin with, we architects present very complicated ideas, sometimes using like languages that are too difficult for like regular people to understand. But learning with children, sometimes they talk about green idea in a very simple languages that we all understand. So like being able to actually, one of them said to me that like, what if I lie down on my bed and then I can actually look through my roof of the building and be able to see the sky? That simple idea were just like amazing in some way. And then we have so much to learn from them. And the other one, like one of the kids just described a bridge to me, just a New York Brooklyn bridge. It looks like just like no different than a suspension bridge. But then the way he described to me, it was that like that looked like a big smile to me. Sometimes like things like that really changes how we actually see the whole world. If we can actually look at them in a very innocent way, some of this like complicated issues we have could actually be really toned down into like ideas that we all understand.
That's true. Sometimes, you get good ideas from just looking at it in a different way. Like you mentioned, just, if you're lying on bed and you're seeing the sky, that's another way of looking at it. Fantastic. While Dr. Hariharan is joining us, we have the questions that he had shared with us earlier. So I open this question for all the panel speakers, if they can share their views. What do you see the marketplace to be in the next 2 decades with oil and coal becoming history and cars being electric, with homes and cars more and more rented and not bought by the general Gen Next. The whole idea here is that people are now looking at shared economy. Dr. Hariharan, you are here with us. Can you hear us?
Well, I can hear you loud
When the
and
whole
clear.
concept is
I hope
moving
you all
toward,
do.
yes, yes, your question, I was just mentioning that when every one of us is looking at shared economy and Airbnb and Uber and Ola's, so how this entire physical built space, architecture gets impacted. Alok ji, if you would like to go ahead with that.
Right. I would have a more optimistic picture. So I would believe that the mankind is innovative. We have survived similar dire predictions of very recently COVID ending the world, or more earlier about how population would outstrip food supply. So I am positive we will rise to the challenge and we will innovate. People will continue buying homes, and we will find a way of living with the climate. So I think it's also to do that we need to keep pushing to make sure climate or living in harmony with nature is very much a center stage of all the discussions. But it's not a doomsday scenario for me.
Okay. Architect Rajendra Kumar, what's your take on that? Are we looking at people not owning real estate? Is it going to impact the way we are designing our buildings?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much, Reality Plus, for inviting me, and thank you so much, Dr. Hariharan, to be as a mentor not only for young generation but for all. Thank you so much. Okay, so answering your question about what is going to happen when we talk about this renting trend as this thing, I believe that it will not impact much in terms of a number when we are talking of. Car will keep on adding, because if you remember when the CNG was invented, when the CNG came in India, we thought that okay, the consumption of diesel or petrol will be less, but it is not. It is also the same. So the same way, please understand, if we are going for either taking the example of car, definitely the number of electric car might be more, and diesel car might be, or petrol car might be less. That might be plus minus here and there, but number will remain same. Same goes for houses. Either houses, whether we talk about rented or we talk about the owning, the number are going to increase the same pace, or maybe even with the higher pace.
Dr. Hariharan, please take this conversation forward. Dr. Hariharan, do we have here? Mahesh, what do you see? You have worked with HNI clients. How's their perspective towards rebuilding their relationship with nature?
Sure.
Are they now?
We all have. Do you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Hariharan, we can hear you.
Hear me there?
Mahesh, please go ahead.
Dr. Hariharan is the voice is little breaking and there's an echo.
Challenges of technology,
We all face them sometime or the other.
Yes.
I'm trying not to be the devil's advocate over here, but in fact, luxury, no matter what Alokji is doing, obviously he's coming at tiles which are going to 8 feet and 4 feet. The luxury segment is match marble is a natural material. To book match and install that, take about 30% wastage of material. Whereas Alokji's product doesn't need more than 5% wastage. Timber, the same texture, wood feel. CNG, why are we seeing the S-Class and the Rolls Royces coming out in CNG versions, green fuel versions and everything? that segment of the market is not against nature, but the demand of that market is there. Unfortunately, I'm catering to that market only. Dubai, every building has glass facades. You and me know better than anybody else that Dubai is not a place to have glass facade. The kind of load on electricity, MEP, air conditioning, and everything is totally adverse. And Dubai is going on winning green awards and LEED awards. And how contradictory is that? Is it really making sense? Maybe because of the pandemic, yes, we are a little more conscious about the cabs and the tables and the restaurant situation. But even before that, sharing cabs, sharing cars, going in a carpool, not common culture for us. You know? The moment we have a villa with a private pool, we are more happy compared to a shared pool. So it's a balance of equation, and you cannot blame the person who has a demand for luxuries, lifestyle, whether he's behaving responsibly or irresponsibly. You know, it's not, it has to be a balance. Although, like I'm telling you, Alokji's products are coming at par with Bookmatch Tile and the work. Electric cars are coming into the market but are not successful. The 14th floor, second floor, third floor people, they don't have access to plug points. Ground floor, Delhi houses have easy access to plug points, charging stations. There are challenges, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening. The switch, the conscious change is coming.
Okay, so that's positive. That yes, change is happening. But Architect Pandya, what Mahesh just mentioned about that, what the irony of having glass buildings in Dubai and those buildings getting LEED certifications. What do you have to say about that?
No, that pre or post remains the same pandemic. I think it's a flaw of a prescriptive norm, rather than performance-based norm. The moment you go for universal application of any bylaw or any kind of guideline, that is where it fails. So I mean, it doesn't matter whatever that norm may be. Even the building bylaws, what works in Shimla need not be the same in Ahmedabad, need not be the same in Kerala. So it's fundamentally flawed at the universality of those bylaws and the mechanical application of that. Like I can tell you, the most adverse bylaws that we have recently framed under the smartness of the kind of same. For example, Ahmedabad used to have 4 feet of balcony as a FSI free, meaning incentive to be outdoors and whatnot, and 4 feet balcony also gave protection from sun and rain onto the vertical walls. Now we have 2 feet instead of 4 feet as architectural projection, but look at the regressiveness of those norms. For example, 2 feet as architectural projection as Alucobond boxes I can create, and that is as an encroachment allowed in the margin, but 2 feet extension of my floor, I cannot have a cupboard of 2 feet on that particular zone, which will actually give me insulation from the external vagaries and would be a perfect strategy instead of thick wall, kind of external envelope massing and insulation. But that is denied. So it very clearly shows that what kind of foundation or philosophy on which these bylaws are being framed. And in fact, in our case, we have regressed from there. Same thing was the case about 20, 30 years ago, where nobody in Ahmedabad liked to be in a high-rise. So even just now, it's not the choice. What had happened was that it was a bylaws incentive that on the same plot, if you build high-rise, you will get 50% extra FAR. So naturally, everybody went to that. In the same, if you build 4-story versus if you build taller, you get extra FAR. So that is where the whole question is with the norms. And that's where I'm feeling that this debate post-pandemic has a different standpoint with which it needs to look at the same issues, but I believe now it is less to convince because pandemic has taught us one, equality. Everybody was in the same boat, and in fact, it came top down rather than bottom up. Second, that humility, that you are not a master over nature, but you are absolute subservient and a microcosm to the cosmos. Third, the frugality that we all knew with what little could we live without compromise. So it should be less of a kind of convincing thing, even for the luxury for that matter. And fourth, of course, sustainability, meaning living with nature. And that doesn't mean energy, that doesn't mean the kind of rating, but simply nature in terms of let's have the view outdoors, let's have the vegetation, let's be with another fellow human being. So the fundamental tenets of your existence as human to human bond and human to nature bond. And I think there has been a lot of resurgence in these values. I mean, lately, at least including the builder client that we have, by chance got coming to us, have been asking for some such provision. Of course, what Rajendra ji was talking about, but I would say it's the debate of quantity versus quality. Now is the time to talk about quality, that home cannot be anything other than this. And that's where I think we can make a difference. All these while in the disguise of economics, in the disguise of resource crunch, we have been only compromising the quality. While finally anything, whether place of work or place of stay, is about quality of life. So I think if it's a technology
That's
or
right.
if it's any other design, it has to only look at how can you enhance quality of life.
That is right. That is right. The quality of life. And yes, as you said, it is a wake up call. What is, the last year has been a wake up call for all of us. I think the awareness has increased. I would like to get views from all our panel members here. What Architect Yatin Pandya has just mentioned, that the government role, the laws and regulations also have to keep up with that. So starting with Vicky, your views on how government laws and regulations have to, it cannot be a one-sided. Government, private developers, designers, and the consumer, the client also has to be in sync. So how do we start with the government rules and regulations, and then we move on to other speakers?
Yeah,
Vicky.
that was a very great observation. Being able to actually regulate some of this out of control building through building code or building law, I think is very important. I want to go back to one of the earlier things that you said about shared economy. So there are so many co-working space, co-living space, and then all kind of co-sharing spaces that are popping out all over the world, and many of them went bankrupt. They just opened for 2 months and then they went bankrupt. All the energy, all the carbon resources that we spend on those spaces basically just went to waste, including some of the shared vehicle, shared bicycle. Many of them just went to the trash and all kind of dumped. So I feel as we invented new capital idea, many of this actually, I mean, many of this country are actually into capitalism. They let the market kind of drive for this new idea. But at the same time, as the influence of how actually we use this space, I think we need to have some sensibility and cap a certain limitation until the market model is actually proven to be successful. Otherwise, we're just dumping way too much resources to make all these co-living and co-working spaces that no one wanted at the moment.
Okay, great. Architect Rajendra Kumar, let's move on to you. The sync between government, private developers, designers, and the customer. How do we get that, starting from the government?
I absolutely agree with Mr. Yatin Pandya. I believe that he has raised a very, very important point. The problem lies from there only. I think we need to have a very sensible people who should be making such kind of a regulation, because just following the norm coming from Wonderland and putting it up in any of the city and in a uniform way, like Mr. Yatin Pandya mentioned about the policy of Shimla and policy of Kerala or Rajasthan. In some way, there is a similarity. It should not be there. I believe that to overcome a situation like this, we need to have a senior people like Mr. Pandya, Mr. Hariharan and all. They should be on a very active advisory position in a government policy making. Unfortunately, that kind of a point is missing. The government is not very serious of engaging professionals. That should be one of the first point we should do, that not to forget about the issue of this IIM Ahmedabad. I mean, where the government made all the policy and everything was there, but when the intervention of by local architects, when it happened, then they realized that no, it has some historical and traditional value also of it. Then government had to step back. So I believe that it is very important to have the senior people and professional people in the advisory team with the government going hand in hand.
Mr. Agarwal, what do you have to say from perspective of the industry? What are you seeing happening in this segment?
Yeah, I see. So first, building and construction is among the largest employers as an industry. However, I think, as Rajendra ji was saying, we could do with a much higher engagement with government bodies to frame rules as well as to execute them. Remember, I work in a category where almost 50% of the category is by players from Gujarat who don't even pay taxes. So to me, laws is desirable, but the basic necessities of taxes is also not executed. So here is an industry which is not even paying taxes. So laws, oh, love it. We should have them, but take care of the taxes first.
Okay, so that's another angle that we get, equality in terms of
I have
what
to hear
laws
from
government is
Pandeyji.
making.
He's raising his
But
hand,
let's
and I'm
first go
sure
to.
that's
No, I was hoping to give a positive. Sorry, Mahesh ji, आप बता दो. Otherwise, I
आपका view लेके then we'll go to
I was going to give one positive example of what you say about this interface between professional government and the vision for cities development. One was Mr. Bloomberg as a mayor of New York City and the speaker, two of them. It's just the strategy that they employed, that they actually hired as, I don't know, volunteers or otherwise, about 290 resource persons on different areas, whether it was like the old flush tank was consuming so much gallons of water and therefore their problem was emptying in the sea, to small parks, to whatever red light areas, etc., etc. They all, so number one was, it is a team of people. It's not one commissioner, one architect, one whatever. Second one was that they were given at least 1 year lead time to research. And I have seen the document. It's this thick document, which will go to Mahesh ji, and he would put a yellow overriding marker on that, and it'll go to Rajendra ji, and he will put blue marker. So each one from their corresponding area would give feedback. So second one was the research and the time. And from that, they derived some 292 recommendations. And that became then the basis to apply it for the city, which could even mean conservation and highline. It could also mean development of small park. It could also mean new gadgets for the water flushing, like that. So then it becomes integrated, holistic, researched, and professional.
Okay, so Architect Pandya is saying that research is, fundamental to when we are talking about sync between all the stakeholders of the industry. Dr. Hariharan, are you back with us? Okay, I take his question on the same thing what we have just spoken about. How do we motivate the market and the consumer to see the dire need to go sustainable? In our earlier discussion, we had this point that a consumer, especially residential housing, is the biggest real estate segment. A consumer is ready to pay for a tangible product like a home automation if a developer is offering, but he would not be very happy to pay for something which is intangible. He cannot see, maybe a green cement or maybe a green construction material. So what Dr. Hariharan is asking, how do we motivate the customers towards that? So Mahesh, we'll start with you, starting from the luxury clients.
It would happen, firstly, like Mr. Rajendra said, government implementation level. It will start from the government implementation level. There are bylaws which are making rainwater harvesting compulsory. So whether the customer wants it or not, the building gets its occupation certificates after the rainwater harvesting is done. The kind of parking provisions are done, so the pressure and the load is not coming on this. In addition to that, there are some incentives on solar panels, batteries, and everything. But the capital investment and the return ROI is so slow on that the builder or the systems in place are not incentive enough for people to implement it on that level. After that, once these systems are already incorporated in a building with swimming pools or with facilities, automatically the consumer is going to become conscious and use it. And today the customers talk about it. They speak about it. We've done lobbies, we've done high-end lobbies which are working on solar panels. The lighting changes, sources change. The buildings, blinds and curtains change depending on the sun. So the customer is taking pride in saying, this is how my building is. My electricity is solar powered. I am not, we are not. Although he did not do anything. The builders set up everything with people like JLL and somebody like Vicky has designed it and gone. But the customer is taking great pride in incorporating. And that follows on to the next generation. This is my point.
Okay. Okay. So one, we have to make them feel proud of going green. Second is make laws stringent enough to make people use green products. Second is incentivize them to use go green. Vicky, your views on that? How do we motivate the customer?
Oh, I think it has to be begin with younger generation. That's why we teach and that's why we educate the younger children. As simple as that. One other thing I wanted to add to that is that when we teach like kids, they don't see a lot of environmental problems sometimes. When we present them to them, look at that 12-lane highway. I said it's a problem, but they don't see it. So I think being able to educate them to see the problem of the environment, I think is actually quite crucial.
Okay, that's quite a good point. That let's start building it right from the early age, so that the next generation that comes up, they are already aware of what's the right thing to do. Architect Kumar, what's your take on that? How do we motivate laws, incentives, education at early age? Your point that you would like to add.
I would just like to extend the point of what Vicky has mentioned. My son plays a very good game on that's Among Us. There's Among Us and Unspeakable and so on and so forth. I don't even remember those games. And I have seen these kind of international gaming channel which are targeting the kid from 5 to 15 years old also. These are also having a great messages. I mean, those messages which we were talking almost like when we were in adult. Like, for example, don't litter, don't talk this kind of a language, please walk on pedestrian only. These kind of a message which were like the talk among the intellectuals. Now these are also coming in the younger gaming. I mean, these kind of a gamings which is really I'm very fond of because I do that. So that is also one of the things which should be always there, starting from the very childhood. I mean, the moment when the kids are in understanding, they can also influence their father also. For example, my son doesn't allow me to open the window and to throw things out either from home or from car. So that is, I mean, they also inspire us. So we inspire them, they inspire us. So that is one thing from the house. And another thing is when we talk about, especially about incentives, I believe that government is taking up some step, like for example in Delhi, a recent is there that all the cars or two-wheeler which are electric two-wheelers, so there is no registration fees. I'm talking registration in RTOs and all. So there are few baby steps are being taken by government initiative, but the thing is that these baby steps should be little bit more and more frequent. In the building industry also, there have been a good changes. I'll raise the example.
They are giving extra FSI and things like that. If you have a green solar and rainwater harvesting, things like that.
Water harvesting, yes. Extra FSI, maybe yes, maybe no. But I believe that there are now the government are realizing, but they are realizing very slow.
Okay. So as long as we are on the right path, I think that's a positive note. Alok Agarwalji, I want to ask you, are the manufacturers looking at being green as a brand value? Is it becoming with the industry now?
So there is greenwashing happening everywhere. So, but so if I were to leave greenwashing aside, this is how the typical manufacturer would approach. So first is things which are actually green for the consumer. Uh, so you would make products which actually make a difference to the energy consumption, like we have cool tiles. They reduce the temperature by 7 degrees, and it's used by, let's say, the military establishment in Jaisalmer. It's a fabulous way of saving electricity as well. uh, we would typically sell it not because it's energy saving, but because it keeps the indoor temperature lesser by 7 degrees. Now, it's a way of articulating it rather than trying to harp on your green credentials. We would, for example, as a company, have zero wastewater discharge. We would have energy management systems like 50,000, but we don't talk about it because it's got so low traction with our stakeholders. So I can't think of any architect, builder, developer who would, raise an eyebrow or allow me to enter the door if I were to say I have ISO 50,000 energy management system. I might be the only building material company to have it, but he will say, "Kya farak padta? Daam batao." So I have to talk his language, which is okay. This is the benefit you are interested in, while I will do things to make myself more sustainable, and that's purely corporate values. So for me, I can say with pride that we take nothing which is beyond 150 kilometers. So 100% of our tiles are made by materials sourced locally. But that's not a claim that will, help me win, let's say, Mahesh Ji's or Yatin Ji's business. So I would more like tell them that, okay, how do I make your life easier? So I think it's what sells, and that's what you do.
I'm sure Mahesh's and Yatin's Day's business is coming to you, but there is a gap. What Alokji mentioned here, that yes, if even if product companies are investing in those green technologies, reducing their carbon footprint, the clients or the buyers are not that much acknowledging of that effort. Mr. Pandya, now that you were pointed out, so if you would like to take on that, how do we fill this gap?
No, see, like Alokji already mentioned, that it has to reach out to, like Gujarati mein bolte hain, mera kitna taka. So what's in there for me? So you have to have the same product, but for him to know that there's something for him too. So for example, I'd say when we did this recycled waste material for one of the centers we did in the real in slum, the client said that don't make us guinea pig. So we said no, it would be not more expensive than the kind of things that otherwise you would have put. And second, we in fact did all kind of tasting and certification to show that it's not poorer or inferior, and over time it has already proven itself. So when it can meet the performance and with the right kind of it's like, people don't mind going for 5-star AC nowadays, so they might pay a little more, but because they know scientifically what would be their return, and likewise. So I think each kind of product might take a little while to get that acceptance by knowing what is in there for them. Okay, so I think when we meet, one, the cost, second, the performance for whatever that it is, when these two are ensured, I don't think user has then a further problem with using something as an alternative. And that has to be the challenge. You cannot say, oh, by using my tile, which has 150-kilometer range, but you paying little extra for that. I think that may not be acceptable, at least to us Ahmedabadis. But you say that, don't worry how I produce it. That's my conscience, my ethics and whatnot. But you are getting this better than China. You're getting it at cheaper price. And look at the luster, look at the performance, look at the compressive strength, look at this, and then buy. So you cannot fall on the sympathy ground to say, oh, because I did this, give me more or whatnot. If product stands on its own, and then people with comparison would definitely opt for this. Like right now, the technology that can work for people. So battery was a problem in a solar, energy kind of regeneration. And now government has directly connected it to a grid. And now any Tom, Dick, Harry, whether it's a builder or whether it's a householder, is asking for connecting it to the grid because they've been told and they know that 3 years is a payback time. And therefore, some developers also create 3 years maintenance kind of a window by which they reap the harvest of that investment and whatnot. So when it performs on aesthetic ground, on economics ground, and on the performance ground, then that product has no problem being a better, smarter alternative.
Okay, okay. So again, what Dr. Architect Pandya is saying, what's in it for me? That is, if that goes to the client, he sure is going to be interested in the product. Moving on from the buildings to a more macro level now, you know, most of the cities across the world, you know, urban cities are facing housing challenge. Urban cities, all they are all bursting to the seams. Providing decent housing is what we need in future. How do we go about it in sync with the environment again? Because we are talking about planning for the future. What we have done, let's leave it in the past. What we should do now to provide decent, affordable housing to our urban cities. You know, Vicky, what's your experience? How are you working on that?
Wow, Hong Kong is one of the worst cities that many of you could imagine. We have like such a bad housing crisis that we are probably the worst city in the world right now. So there's so many like reasons that cause that problem. But I think to summarize it in just one sentences, I would say that if only one family buy one apartment, then I think we solve all the problem. Like so many people are so rich, they buy like 5 apartments and then there's leave no room for the people who actually needed the home to stay. So other than that, like there's so many solutions out there, but I think that the main cause of the issue is still capitalism, that people have way too much money.
Okay, so like we discussed in the last panel, there has to be, or Mr. Pandya, you know, said that there has to be difference between the need and the greed. So that has to be identified. You know, Architect Kumar, your take on, you know, we have this problem of slums, unauthorized colonies. How do we give decent living to people in our cities without impacting? You know, urbanization is the need of the hour. We need to build houses, but how do we do it in sync with the nature?
I'd
You know,
like
but
to
before
answer
that, I
that
would
after.
also like to add at
Yes,
this
Mahesh.
point about affordable housing. I absolutely agree with the point of, you know, this not letting or having a difficulty for the second house of any individual, be it for. So we first we should understand why, if I am having a house, why I will buy 10 more houses, because I have, as of now, I have surplus money. I am waiting for 10 more year so that the price may increase. So by the time this price may increase, the affordable become unaffordable for many people. The only solution is by the government, which we should make it. I have spoken on many forum about this thing, is that housing should also become a basic commodity, because the moment it becomes a basic commodity, Germany is one of the example where it is considered as one of the basic commodity. So you cannot have more than what you require. So that will really solve one of the issue about housing. And about talking about your slum issues and all, please try to understand one thing very importantly, that any big mega project of any city, by the time when this mega project finish, one new slum happens. Why? Because all this labor and all those workforce come from external part. I mean, let's say in North India, mainly they come from UP, Bihar, and other places where these laborers come. They are exported laborers from this thing. They work for these projects for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then it end up having a slum after completion of those projects. So one mega project means one mega slum. That is the trend in many other cities. To overcome that thing, I think we should have a renting a policy very intact, and that should be, I believe, that is sponsored or supported by government. Here, the private player may not be very interested, but renting policy is the need of the hour to avoid the future.
Yes, government has also already come up with the affordable housing rental scheme. So, you know, AHRC, which we, you know, hopefully will see soon, and it will solve a lot of problems, hopefully. Alokji, again, your take on it, you know, you are the one who are, you know, in touch with the developers, in terms of this thing. Mahesh,
Right.
architect Rajendra Kumar has shared a point that when we have a big project, we also have slums with it. Hopefully, should get resolved with the AHRC scheme that the government has come up. In your own experience as part of the industry, how do you see the decent, providing decent housing in terms of, when we say decent housing, we have seen a lot of these projects for affordable housing where people call it vertical slums. How do we maintain that quality of affordable housing by using the right materials? Probably they are cheaper, but they are quality products.
Yeah. Mahesh ji, you wanted to say something. Would you want to go first or shall I?
I'd like to add to what Mr. He said. He faces very, very strict competition from Mumbai. Hong Kong is nowhere close. And the issue with urbanization slums is, I personally feel, is infrastructure, especially in the South Asian countries where Vicky's from. The infrastructure arrives in that location or the satellite town much before the buildings are constructed. Whereas it's the exact opposite in our country. Places like Gurgaon, places like BKC, Bandra Kurla Complex, places like New Bombay, Vashi, if you're aware of the demographics of Mumbai. Vicky, these are all places around Mumbai and Delhi, but 20 to 40 kilometers away. They are fantastic hubs which have sprung up, which are attracting all the international brands with full buildings and towers and everything. But every building there today is still working on genset backups. It's still working on diesel generators. The metros, the trains, the transport infrastructure has barely started catching up with these areas, although Gurgaon is called a super city. Same thing with Virar and beyond, Palghar. The moment you go, there is fantastic housing coming up by Lodhas and gated communities, but absolutely no accessibility by train. The bus could take hours, the highways are jammed. So the infrastructure catches up after the housing is developed, which should be the exact other way around how it is in China. The trains have reached far ends of China, and that's when the place springs up with housing and everything. So this is a phenomena which is facing a huge crisis. And in this COVID times, whoever was not near the hubs, near the stations, near the network connecting routes was totally cut off, even from his bread and butter and livelihood. Whereas the people who were around the 20-kilometer radius of central Bombay, somehow they started their work and they could come report to work once the lockdown started getting eased off. So infrastructure, I think, is the first thing. And then I would love to have a riverside home. Riverside, Neral and everything is 40 kilometers from here, 50 kilometers from here. But it's not very far. But getting down there, taking about 3.5 hours, doesn't make sense on an everyday basis.
That's right. Infrastructure and connectivity. And a lot of developers tell us that it's like putting, the horse before the cart. The developments come up first and the infrastructure is still not there. So, Alok ji, you were planning to say something.
Yes. So, so we work with a lot of affording housing builders and developers, and it's fascinating working with them. So, be it, and there are various names in every metro city around them. What we have found very useful is to not look at housing. You have to look at, let's say, the first 1 year cost of the tenant. So it's the housing cost. Think of his furniture. So think of some basic furnishing, let's say wardrobes, fittings, or you think of what he would typically have. How do you make the whole package, including the running costs, so that it becomes affordable? Because money can flow from capital to operating expense and vice versa. So let me explain you what I mean. So, for example, we were working with a massive player in around Gurgaon, and one of the things we said, okay, how do we work towards minimizing the fittings in the bathroom and the kitchen? And we pretty much said, okay, this is at a design stage. We are not trying to innovate. We are saying with existing things, how can we make it happen? So it was stuff like, let's plan for niches in the bathroom so that there is not an extra fitting put in, and every fitting is possibly around 200 rupees. But that's how you shave off costs. Or for example, can we make an interesting bench near the window to do away with his requirement for a sofa? Now, we worked with him to make the sofa with a feel of natural leather. So you have a natural leather tile, which is put at the time of construction, which does away with the need for furniture, but allows him to claim कि देखो semi-furnished house है. So that is how you manage the system cost. And I think the innovation needs to come in from all the stakeholders. And then, I'm sure we can create this as well.
I think that's right. What Vicky Chan mentioned, earlier is it's all about thinking. Your design thinking. You can think everything in various ways and come out with something different. And money is not only about what kind of things you are putting in. Architect Pandya, I'll come to you. You have heard about let's not be greedy. Let's buy only what we need. You have also heard what Alok has said, that let's think different. When we are talking about saving cost, when we are talking about providing decent housing within affordable cost, infrastructure, as Mahesh said, is a problem. If you do not provide infrastructure, you are obviously increasing the cost of the house. And what Rajendra Kumar ji said, when a developer is developing a project, he needs to take care of the housing of the people who are working there. So how do we look at this entire housing system? How can we create a decent, affordable housing for the people? Again, the same question comes in.
Yeah, so that's where I was hoping to go one step still backward about the definition of what you call slum or whatnot. For example, is slum a question or a solution? For example, if one agency was to deliver all the deficit of housing, no country in the world would ever be able to catch up. As against, do you not think that these people are creating shelter to themselves without, they might be pledging their wives' jewelry or whatever to raise money for the building? But where they cannot come in is land and infrastructure. So land and infrastructure is the only component if government looks after, and the building and the rest of it, amenities, etc., is taken care of by the people, and maybe for amenities and all developer. That kind of a distribution of role, then everybody can stretch themselves as much thin for that. And that's why I feel that we have a renaissance in 1980s and 90s where the architect with capital A kind of signatory architects entered into housing, and we had many models for affordable housing, where the Aranya low-cost housing in Indore was one end, or Mr. Korea's Belapur housing was the other end, or Asiad Village in 82 was the other end, and so on and so forth. All I'm saying is that all of them said that, look, let people feel involved. Like even post-earthquake, when we worked on 18 entire villages, government took 2 years to find an agency and contractor to do something where people building their own with their own system. It's not even self-help, but self-managed, and that was in 3 months ready with the entire settlement, because one person building 100 houses versus 100 family building one house each, which would be better, close to their lifestyle and demand, which one would be faster, and which one would be without any burden on a system. So we have to look at different, like what I think Rajendra Kumar was saying. Everything is not on the onus of private developer, or because each one has a different motive. What doesn't sell is not the segment private developer may want to enter, but government has the onus to provide something by the way of equal distribution or whatnot. So let certain segment be offered. So it doesn't mean even full building. That's another definition I'll come to in a second. But let's say there is certain kind of segment that government feels get towards, where with the help of the user's own initiative as well as resources. So it's sharing, not welfare giving. Other one is where the institutional kind of frameworks come up, and third is the commercial this thing. Now the question of even the norms. Why building with such and such material, that is pakka, and why building with such and such size is the only one that qualifies to be a decent house. If we learn from the settlement of the non-affordable group, most of the thing they do is in outdoors, so climatically and culturally. And if I provide therefore one room and extra plinth, is it wrong? That even gives a chance to incrementally grow. It gives a chance to build as in how I want it later. Likewise, as against we straight jacket, put them in a mold, and that even creates mismatches. It adds to the resources, etc. Like I always say that in a different example, Ahmedabad city does not have any larger air-conditioned auditorium hall for performances, lectures, etc. than about 737. Now, so many schools, when they want to do their campus, they say we have 1,200 students, so multiplied by 1. So give us an auditorium of 1,200 people. I said, the city doesn't have it. For few events in the year, why do you want to build that? So we have not questioned what are we building. For example, with demand, in the recession, commercial spaces are created the most, hoping for the storm after the lull. As against if we build half of that commercial space, which are not even needed, into a right kind of, so government policy on one hand to know how much of construction, energy, effort, and whatever mandate should go towards priority area of ABC. Then next, let the right segment people fill in the kind of thing with their own motive that they can do the best. And third, like I'm exactly comparing the post-earthquake example, where government need not have entered into building every house, and not that it did in a way. What it said is that it created a policy that, okay, we have got a donation, we can help to this extent. At every stage, you can claim so much from this. Now, if people build or were responsible in getting their houses designed, built, or whatever, NGOs or institutions could take up the amenities and so on and so forth, and government only concentrated on infrastructure, that there's road, water supply, drainage, and electricity to those places, a fantastic distribution and no problem.
That's true. I think decentralization is something what architect Pandya is talking about. Let's give people the power to build their own houses. Let's leave it to them how they want to build their houses. Let's not straitjacket it. As he said. In fact, there was in Mumbai slum development Dharavi. That was one of the opinions that let them do in situ development instead of shifting them away and then building towers there. So that is one big point that comes out from this conversation. Let's have decentralization. Let each party, let each stakeholder work on what is their expertise, their strong point. Let's involve NGOs, let's involve people in planning the future. So coming, I have one question here from one of our audience. What are the reasons that not many architects are engaged in social impact projects? So, Vicky, you are involved in a lot of social impact projects. What's your experience?
I will speak for myself. My firm do a 100% NGO work, so I'm very proud to say that we have been able to do that. And to answer your question, why are there not many people doing it? Is because it's very, very difficult. We we don't make a lot of money. That's all that I can say.
Okay, how is it difficult? Because in other segments, we see a lot of people, lawyers are doing pro bono work, IT companies are doing, building platforms which can be used by, microtech or things like that, minorities. Why not in architecture? Why is it so difficult?
I don't think it is difficult. It's just the mindset with which you want to run your firm. So, for example, if you think, I'll give you two parallels. For example, anybody wants to be a doctor in a very remote area, he would be respected, he would be rich, and he would have used all his know-how in the best of the way. But how many are kind of wanting to do that? Similarly, in a recession, there's never a recession in the basic need area, But we want to invest in a luxury car. So BMWs in recession may not sell, as against the Marutis or Nanos would do well. So what segment you want to fit in? So when there is a demand more than supply, can there ever be a recession, and can there ever be a dearth of a? But if you want to build luxury condos and then feel कि यार ये 5 करोड़ वाले क्लाइंट आजकल बैठ गए पेंडेमिक के बाद, पर जिसको बैंक की लोन है वो कोई बैठा नहीं है, और वो सेगमेंट में आप इन्वेस्ट करो तो वो काम तो चलता ही रहता है. So I think it is just the ambition or the mindset of the whichever company that wants to bracket themselves into particular kind of work, and that work may be subject to market risk. वो वाली warning आती है ना.
Mahesh, you would like to comment on that? Mahesh, you would like to comment on that? Are there enough architects who are engaged in social impact work in India, or we can do more?
The ratio imbalance is quite a bit, I would say, comparing to the demand for luxury vis-a-vis the demand for sustainable materials, green materials. Rural areas, upcoming projects, satellite towns, I think are much more flexible, and there is more possibility due to the availability of space and due to the lack of infrastructure and lack of amenities. They have started opting out for these kind of projects, which is definitely a thumbs up in those kind of homes.
No, but if you compare with medical science, you think there are less hospital needed in rural area, but hospital, we make it into such a big animal that that area cannot sustain. But if you go to medical science, that is most needed in those areas than even some other place. So demand supply is also a twisted kind of a thing. That demand in terms of hospital, so the viability of a hospital versus a need for a barefoot doctor. So that's what I'm saying, that there need to be different kinds of mindset created by different kind of education avenues that you can even contribute here, and without being compromise a dukhi architect.
Okay. So architect analysis both can be balanced. Architect Kumar, I just quickly want to know your views. You have also been teaching students. Do you see that aspiration in them to do something for the society?
First of all, because since you mentioned about social impact, so the moment when we are talking about social impact, we always think that it is NGO kind of work, or it is something like that, working for rural or villages and all. Social impact can be created by the project of even for working for Mukesh Ambani's house or anything. The social impact it could be for poor or for rich. So answering the question about this audience, that are the architect involved for social impact? Yes, 100% architect are involved for social impact. Yes, maybe we can think about social impact. Does it symbolize only for NGO? So yeah, there are architects like Laurie Baker, even for that matter, Mr. Yatin Pandya, his work in Bhuj. It's really a big clap for Yatin Pandya sir for his work in Bhuj for as a big social impact. So there are many architects who are.
So again, we need to bracket the social work. We should not bracket what social impact means in architecture. It can be at the top of the pyramid. It can be at the bottom of the pyramid.
I would like to add one line to this.
Yes.
I personally would like to confess, when I receive a call or an inquiry from a trust or a charitable or a religious institution, the first thought coming to my mind is, the finances are going to be. So that's why I approached the whole thing, As I'm coming from that background, I hope I'm wrong about it, but so far that's a judgment which happens,
Okay.
So your secretary says you are not available then, is it?
I'm not
your quick view on that, how the industry, we'll take your view as an industry person. Is the industry making a social impact?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think you keep trying to push the envelope in every which way. So, answering at both levels. First, I would deliberately go to the architect's perspective. I think the architect is an incredible point of confluence of a lot of conflicting things. The typical architect is highly educated, very savvy, and he's dealing with a very unorganized world, be it masons, contractors on one side, and a whole host of segments, carpenters, lelo, plumbers, lelo, and he's expected to deliver the perfect finish. It is an incredibly tough job. It's far more tougher than a doctor. And I can tell you that I would any day be a doctor than an architect if I had to study again. Now, I think and this guy is also managing his finances without an MBA background, managing P&Ls and whatnot, managing people without an HR background. He is, not prepared for the kind of work that he needs to do. And expecting him to do also social impact, well, if he does it, it'll be awesome. But I think we are expecting too much out of a architect. I mean, it's really too much. And as an industry, I really think that we are pushing the envelope everywhere. So as Oriental, for example, we have discovered that tiles could have written education material. And we do primary schools, and we have done 150 primary schools, which basically have educational material on them. So you are taking care of infrastructure as well as educational content. So you have to be creative. You have to make a social impact because it benefits the business. So I'm not doing it out of a sense of good. I do it in the 100 kilometers around my factory. I have great goodwill with the village labor. I will never have a labor problem in my factory. So, but their children love the schools they go. Even if the teachers are not there, they can get educated. So it's got to be a win-win. I see a benefit out of doing social impact, and I would unhesitantly do it.
Okay, so social impact is not only good for society, but it's also good for business. That is what we are getting to here. And Alokji, you said you would rather be a doctor than an architect. There is also saying that architects can bury their mistake, but the doctors can bury their mistake, but architects keep standing there for ages. So we can't do much. But it was an interesting panel discussion when we are talking about planning for the future. A lot of thoughts that have come from this panel. Let me summarize it. One, keep reimagining. Let's connect with the younger generation. Get ideas from wherever one can get. Think differently. Like Alokji said, why think only in terms of furnishings and furnishings? We can make it within what we are designing. Maheshji mentioned about a lot of challenges that we are facing. Probably we should need to focus in the right areas of infrastructure and connectivity if we want to promote affordable housing. Yatin Pandya ji mentioned that the whole idea of affordable housing has to change. The whole idea of what people have to be part of, what task has to change. And like Rajendra Kumarji said, that social impact can be created at any level. We are limiting ourselves when we are talking about planning for the future, reconnecting with the nature. We have this eminent panel here who are already doing that at their own level. Vicky Chan, who's doing that, teaching children about it, doing those kind of projects that he's taking up. Architect Rajendra Kumar, who is grooming the entire generation of new architects. Alok Agarwal, like he mentioned, that he is already doing things within that 100 kilometers of his operations and is creating a brand value also for himself. Mahesh Punjabi, in terms of luxury projects that he is doing, he is taking care of sustainability within those projects, probably making the client proud of what they are using. And architect Yatin Pandya, who we all know, he has been a very vociferous proponent of sustainability, of green developments, and not only green but also economically sustainable developments, because as we all know, everything what is there for me in it. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us here today. We are very sad that Dr. Hariharan has kept having those internet issues. Otherwise we would have had his views also on this panel. But thank you so much for your time, and I would also request you continue to stay with us, because we have another very powerful message from architect Hafiz Contractor, who said in his message that let's think it that way, that this earth we have not inherited, we have borrowed from our children. So let's treat it that way. So thank you so much and being here with us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome, Sapna. You did very well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alokji.
Congrats.
Thank you, Atinji.